The Space Race 2.0, Billionaires versus Nations, when private wealth conquered the final frontier. Imagine waking up one day to discover that the moon has an owner. Not a country, not the United Nations, a billionaire. His name is on a deed. His company built a base there. His lawyers filed the claim. And now, if you want to mine lunar resources, conduct research, or even land on the surface, you need his permission. You pay his fee, or you don't go. This sounds like science fiction, like a bad episode of a corporate dystopia series where Elon Musk plays the villain and Jeff Bezos is his rival. Except it's not fiction anymore. It's the logical conclusion of what's happening right now. In 2024, private companies launched more rockets into space than all the world's governments combined.
Visual comparison.
Not by a little,
Dozens
by a lot.
Of glowing
SpaceX alone conducted over 100 launches,
grounded
more than China,
launch pads
Russia,
active.
and Europe put
Flags
together.
Fade into
NASA, the agency that put humans on the moon, now pays private companies to deliver its astronauts to the International Space Station. The U.S. military depends on SpaceX's Starlink satellites for battlefield communications. And Elon Musk, one man, unelected, accountable to no government, can decide whether a country gets internet access during a war. He did this in Ukraine, turned Starlink on, then off, then on again. Not because NATO asked, because he felt like it. Meanwhile, Jeff Bezos is building a lunar lander. Richard Branson is selling suborbital joyrides to millionaires. And China is racing to establish a permanent moon base before America can respond. But here's the part nobody's saying out loud. Space is no longer being explored. It's being divided. And the people doing the dividing aren't elected officials representing nations in international law. They're billionaires with rockets, lawyers with contracts, and corporations with profit motives. They're not planting flags for humanity. They're filing claims, mining rights, orbital slots, frequencies, property deeds. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, the international law that says space belongs to all mankind, is being quietly shredded by corporate lawyers who found the loopholes. And those loopholes are big enough to fly a rocket through. This isn't the space race of the 1960s. That was nations competing for glory, science, and geopolitical supremacy. This is Space Race 2.0, and it's billionaires competing for profit, monopoly, and the ultimate resource grab, an entire solar system. The stakes? An asteroid belt worth an estimated $700 quintillion. Control over satellite constellations that could make or break entire economies. Military dominance of the ultimate high ground. And the future of humanity as a spacefaring species, owned not by governments, but by shareholders. So here's the question nobody in power wants to answer. What happens when three guys with rockets have more control over space than 195 countries combined? 1. The boy who watched the moon landing and decided to buy it. Let me tell you a story. It's July 20th, 1969. A 6-year-old boy sits in front of a black and white television in South Africa, watching Neil Armstrong step onto the moon. One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The boy is mesmerized, not by the science, not by the bravery, by the audacity, the idea that humans could leave Earth, could go somewhere else, could claim new ground. That boy grows up. He makes billions selling software and electric cars, and he never forgets that feeling. Decades later, that same boy, now the richest man on Earth, stands on a stage and announces, "I'm going to Mars, and I'm going to die there." His name is Elon Musk, and he's not joking. Why does this matter? Because Elon Musk isn't running a government space program, he's running a private company, SpaceX. And SpaceX has done something no government has done in 50 years, made space travel cheap. NASA's space shuttle cost $1.5 billion per launch. SpaceX's Falcon 9 cost $67 million. That's a 95% reduction. How? Reusable rockets. Government space agencies threw away rockets after one use, like flying a 747 to London once and then crashing it into the ocean. SpaceX lands rockets, refuels them, flies them again. It's so simple it sounds obvious, but it took a billionaire with no aerospace experience to actually do it. Therefore, space is no longer the exclusive domain of superpowers. It's open to anyone who can afford a rocket. And right now, that's billionaires. The Bezos countermove, Blue Origin, and the lunar economy. But Musk isn't alone. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, second richest man on Earth, has his own rocket company, Blue Origin. Bezos has a different philosophy. Musk wants to colonize Mars. Bezos wants to industrialize space. Bezos envisions a future where heavy industry, mining, manufacturing, energy production happens in space, not on Earth. Why? Because Earth is fragile, finite. Better to keep Earth as a nature preserve and move the dirty work into orbit. His plan: build massive rotating space stations where millions of people live and work. Mine the moon and asteroids for resources. Use solar power beamed from space. Sound insane? NASA's studying it. The European Space Agency is interested, and Bezos is spending $1 billion per year of his own money to make it happen. Why are billionaires personally funding space companies at this scale? Because they've done the math. One asteroid, just one, could contain $50 trillion worth of platinum, gold, and rare earth metals. The entire global economy is worth about $100 trillion. One asteroid is half of that. There are millions of asteroids. Therefore, space isn't a frontier, it's a gold rush. And the people with rockets are the ones staking claims. 2. The death of the nation-state space program. Now let's talk about what's dying while billionaires rise. Government space programs. For 60 years, space was the domain of superpowers. The US and the Soviet Union spent hundreds of billions competing to reach the moon, build space stations, send probes to distant planets. It was about prestige, science, military advantage. Then the Cold War ended, and governments stopped caring. NASA's budget peaked in 1966 at 4.4% of the federal budget. Today, it's 0.5%. That's a 90% cut in relative terms. Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, is a shadow of the Soviet program. Their rockets are 1960s technology, still in use because they can't afford to design new ones. Europe's space program is fragmented across national agencies with competing priorities. China is rising, but even China's space budget is a fraction of what the US spent during Apollo. Why did governments abandon space? Because there was no immediate profit, no political payoff, no existential threat forcing them to compete. Space became a luxury, a science project, something to do when the budget allowed. Meanwhile, billionaires looked at the same vacuum and saw opportunity. NASA's surrender when the government became a customer. Here's the moment it became official. In 2020, NASA awarded SpaceX and Boeing contracts to deliver astronauts to the International Space Station. Not to build NASA's rockets, to build their own rockets. And NASA would buy seats, like an airline ticket. NASA, the agency that built the Saturn V, landed 12 men on the moon, launched the Hubble telescope, was now outsourcing space travel to private companies. Boeing's Starliner failed, repeatedly, billions over budget, years behind schedule. SpaceX's Crew Dragon worked, on time, under budget, and NASA had no choice but to depend on it. Today, 100% of American crewed spaceflight depends on SpaceX. Not NASA, not the government, one private company, owned by one man. Why did this happen? Because NASA can't compete. Government bureaucracy, political interference, budget uncertainty. NASA takes 10 years to design a rocket. SpaceX does it in 3. Therefore, the nation-state space program didn't die, it surrendered, and private companies won by default. 3. The new superpowers. 3 men with rockets. Let's be very clear about who controls access to space in 2025. Not countries, not coalitions. 3 men. Elon Musk, the dictator of low Earth orbit. Elon Musk controls SpaceX. SpaceX controls Starlink, a constellation of over 5,000 satellites providing global internet. Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, the most launched rockets in history. Starship, the largest rocket ever built, designed to carry 100+ people to Mars. Dragon spacecraft, the only American vehicle that can carry humans to orbit. Musk has more satellites in orbit than every other entity on Earth combined, governments included. And Starlink isn't just commercial internet, it's military infrastructure. During the Ukraine war, Starlink provided battlefield communications when Russian forces destroyed ground infrastructure. Ukrainian forces used it to coordinate drone strikes, artillery, and troop movements. Then in 2023, Musk turned it off during a Ukrainian offensive in Crimea. Why? He claimed he didn't want to enable escalation. He later turned it back on after pressure from the Pentagon. But the message was clear. One man controls critical military infrastructure, and he answers to no one. Why does this matter? Because space-based communication is now essential to modern warfare. Whoever controls the satellites controls the battlefield. And right now, that's Musk. Therefore, Elon Musk is not just a CEO, he's a geopolitical power with veto authority over military operations. Jeff Bezos, the industrialist. Bezos is quieter, more patient, but no less ambitious. Blue Origin is developing New Glenn, a heavy-lift rocket to compete with Falcon Heavy. Blue Moon, a lunar lander designed to deliver cargo and humans to the moon's surface. Orbital Reef, a private space station for tourism, research, and manufacturing. Bezos has also personally invested in asteroid mining startups, space-based solar power, lunar infrastructure contracts with NASA. Bezos isn't trying to beat Musk to Mars. He's trying to own the moon. Why the moon? Because the moon has water ice at the poles. Water can be split into hydrogen and oxygen, rocket fuel. The moon could become a gas station in space. Whoever controls lunar refueling controls access to the rest of the solar system. Therefore, Bezos isn't racing Musk. He's setting up a toll booth, and everyone going to Mars will have to pay him. Richard Branson and the luxury market. Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic is different. He's not going to Mars. He's not mining asteroids. He's selling suborbital joyrides to millionaires for $450,000 per ticket. It sounds frivolous. It is, but it's also profitable. And it normalizes the idea that space is a consumer product, not a public good, a luxury item. Branson has already flown dozens of paying customers, and he's expanding. Why does this matter? Because once space is a product, it follows the logic of capitalism. Markets, monopolies, inequality. The rich go to space, the poor watch on YouTube. Therefore, space tourism isn't about exploration, it's about exclusivity, and it's working. 4. The resource grab, the asteroid worth more than Earth. Now let's talk about why this matters beyond rockets and egos. Resources. Space contains unfathomable wealth. Not metaphorically, literally. The asteroid belt, $700 quintillion. Between Mars and Jupiter lies the asteroid belt. Millions of rocks, some small, some the size of mountains. And many are made almost entirely of platinum, gold, rare earth metals, and water. A single asteroid, 16 Psyche, is estimated to contain $10 quintillion worth of metals. That's $10 quadrillion. The entire global economy is worth about $100 trillion. One asteroid is worth 100,000 times more than Earth's entire economy. And there are millions of them. Why hasn't anyone mined them yet? Because the technology didn't exist, and it was illegal under international law. But both are changing. Companies like Planetary Resources, backed by billionaires, and Deep Space Industries were founded explicitly to mine asteroids. Both went bankrupt. Not because the idea was bad, because the timeline was too long and investors got impatient. But the technology is maturing. SpaceX's Starship could deliver mining equipment to asteroids. Robotic systems are advancing. And most importantly, the law is being rewritten. The Space Act of 2015, how America legalized space mining. In 2015, the United States passed the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. Buried in the text was a clause that changed everything. A United States citizen engaged in commercial recovery of an asteroid resource or a space resource shall be entitled to any asteroid resource or space resource obtained. Translation: if an American company mines an asteroid, they own what they extract. This directly contradicts the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, which says space is the common heritage of mankind and cannot be appropriated by any nation. But the U.S. didn't care. Luxembourg passed a similar law. So did the UAE. Why did governments legalize space mining? Because if they didn't, private companies would do it anyway, and governments wanted to claim jurisdiction. Therefore, space law is being written by the countries with the most billionaires, and those billionaires are writing the laws. 5. The military high ground, satellites as weapons. But resources aren't the only prize. There's something even more valuable: the high ground. In medieval warfare, whoever held the high ground controlled the battlefield. Archers on hilltops, castles on mountains. In modern warfare, the high ground is orbit, and whoever controls orbit controls Earth. The satellite swarm, Starlink as a military asset. Starlink currently has over 5,000 satellites. China has fewer than 500. Russia, around 150. The disparity is so extreme that the U.S. military is now dependent on Starlink for battlefield communications, drone operations, real-time reconnaissance, Arctic and ocean coverage where traditional infrastructure doesn't exist. But Starlink is a private company. Musk can turn it off, raise prices, sell access to rivals. And the U.S. government has no legal authority to stop him. Why is this dangerous? Because privatized military infrastructure creates a single point of failure controlled by one individual. Therefore, the U.S. military outsourced its space dominance, and now it's a hostage to billionaire whims. China's response: the Great Space Wall. China sees this, and they're terrified. In 2021, China accused Starlink satellites of nearly colliding with their space station. Twice. China filed complaints with the UN. They were ignored. So China announced plans to build their own mega constellation, 13,000 satellites by 2030. Not for civilian internet, for military control. China is also developing anti-satellite weapons. They've tested them. Satellite jamming technology, space-based surveillance networks. China's goal isn't to compete with Starlink commercially, it's to neutralize it militarily. Therefore, the new space race isn't about the moon. It's about who controls the orbits around Earth. And it's already an arms race. 6. The legal void. Who makes the rules when there are no rules? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Space law barely exists. And what does exist is being ignored. The Outer Space Treaty, the law nobody follows. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty was signed by the U.S., Soviet Union, and dozens of other nations. It says, no nation can claim sovereignty over celestial bodies. Space is for peaceful purposes. Space exploration benefits all mankind. Sounds nice, but it's unenforceable and full of loopholes. The treaty says nations can't claim territory, but it doesn't mention corporations. The treaty bans weapons of mass destruction in space, but it doesn't ban conventional weapons, satellites with lasers, kinetic projectiles, orbital bombardment, all technically legal. Why hasn't the treaty been updated? Because no one can agree. The US wants private companies to have freedom. China and Russia want strict government control. Developing nations want resource sharing, so nothing gets done. Therefore, space is effectively lawless. And in a lawless frontier, the people with the most power write the rules. 7. The end game. 3 scenarios for space. Scenario 1. The billionaire oligarchy. Musk reaches Mars. Bezos industrializes the moon. Space becomes privatized. Corporations own asteroids, lunar bases, Martian colonies. Access to space is determined by wealth. The rich become spacefaring, the poor stay on Earth. Governments become irrelevant in space. By 2050, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and a few Chinese state corporations control the solar system. This is corporate feudalism in space. Scenario 2. The new Cold War. China and the US militarize orbit. Satellite constellations become weapons platforms. A conflict on Earth, Taiwan, Ukraine, the Arctic, triggers a space war. Anti-satellite missiles destroy infrastructure. GPS fails. Communications collapse. Global economy crashes. This is the catastrophic scenario, and it's not unlikely. Scenario 3. The United Humanity Governments wake up. International cooperation returns. Space is re-recognized as a commons. Billionaires are regulated. Resources are shared. This is the optimistic scenario. It requires political will that doesn't currently exist. 8. Final thoughts. The species that gave away the stars. So that's the story. Humanity is becoming a spacefaring civilization, but not the way we imagined. Not as a united species reaching for the stars, as a divided species selling the stars to the highest bidder. Why does this matter? Because space is infinite, but access to space is not. And right now, access is controlled by 3 men. The future of humanity as a multiplanetary species is being decided not by elections, not by international treaties, but by shareholder meetings. And the question nobody's answering: what happens when the people who own space decide Earth is no longer profitable?